Councillor Carlson, saw you popped out. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Thank you.
Pardon me.
All right, so we will call today's Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee meeting to order. Mr. City Clerk, could I please have you take our attendance?
Certainly. Councillor
I can
Campbell.
hear you, Ryan.
Councillor Campbell's not present. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
I see that we have Councillor Middleton Hope has joined us online, as has Councillor Croson in the chamber here with us as well. Thank you.
All right. Could I please have a motion to move into the closed session? Councillor Palladino, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. We are now moved into and we will be taking a break now until 1:30. Thank you very much. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the April 20th Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee. City Clerk, could we please have a roll call?
Certainly, thank you. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Campbell. I believe that was, he's present. Councillor Schmidt-Rempel.
Here.
Present.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Thank you, Councillor. We also have Councillor Middleton Hope online and Councillor Crowson with us as well.
Thank you very much. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people, past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. First up, we have adoption of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Palladino. Be it resolved that the agenda of the regular meeting of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee on April 20th be adopted as presented. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you. And as long as nobody's deleted anything or added anything, I would call a vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. We have up next the consent agenda from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the minutes of the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee held on March 16th be approved and the Chair and City Clerk designate be authorized to sign the same. And further, be it resolved that the status of initiatives for April 20th, 2023 be received as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I trust everyone's had a chance to review. I don't see anything in the minutes for the status, unless there's any questions from my colleagues.
I don't see any questions.
Then I will call for the vote, please.
Vote's been called. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, that carries. First up, presentations. We have a presentation from Samantha Scott, University of Lethbridge Students' Union Vice President and Council of Alberta University Students Chair, regarding the citizens of the University of Lethbridge. Ms. Scott? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Samantha Scott, and I'm the Vice President of the University of Lethbridge Students' Union. So today I just wanted to talk quickly about what we do and how we hope to work with the City of Lethbridge to make sure that Lethbridge is a place that students feel like is home. Ultimately, working together will benefit both parties. We can go to the next. So the University of Lethbridge Students' Union, it is mandated to exist by the Post-Secondary Learning Act. So, and we exist with other student unions across the province, so we're not just one unit, and we work with other student unions across the province as well. This means that we are not technically part of the University of Lethbridge. We work with the university and we're on campus, but we are a third party that represents solely undergraduate students. So there is a graduate student union as well. Slide, please. So this means that we represent over 7,000 undergraduate students annually. It's actually closer to 8,000 right now, which is awesome that our numbers are growing. Next slide. So what we do, this is a quick list of what we do to support students. So we have our health and dental plan, which is actually mandatory for students to be on unless they can prove that they're on another dental plan, health and dental plan. We have our food bank. I could talk a lot about food insecurity on campus. It's a big issue right now, and I sent an Excel sheet that has some of the stats on that, so if you're interested, you can take a look. I do external advocacy, VP external, but we also have an internal advocacy position where they help with grade appeals and academic advocacy. So they work more with the actual President's Office of the University and make sure that there's student representation on committees, and as well, when it comes to the policy making for academic appeals and the policy making for the prevention of sexual violence policy and that type of thing. We have our zoo, which is the campus pub. We have events for students, so we have connection cafes once a month where students can come grab a cup of coffee and talk with us, that type of thing. We also have lots of support for clubs and on our campus, which is fantastic. It's so great to see students actively being part of a community with people with the same interests as them. We offer lots of grants, so we have emergency bursaries, which is up to $600 once per year degree if you're struggling. We have travel and conference grants as well, and then our QIP funding for events. We have our convenience store. We have our UPass, which I know you folks know all about. And then we also have our levy groups. So when students pay student union fees, a bit of that money goes towards those groups. So next slide, please. And you can skip that one. I don't think I'll have time for this. These are some of the food bank stats. So like I said, you can see that Excel spreadsheet. So our students make up a large part of the city. We know that they consume goods, they use city services like transit through UPass, and we also know that they bring lots of new knowledge into the city. So I know that we have students who do summer jobs with the city of Lethbridge and as well do sort of research for the city. So there's something to be said about the commitment that these students are making to the city when they decide to attend our post-secondary institution. They're committing and agreeing to spending a minimum of 4 years in Lethbridge and making it their home, but also a permanent part of their life story. So no matter where they go, they're always going to be able to say, I'm alumni of the University of Lethbridge. Next slide, please. And so the Student Union has actually had an opportunity to work, or I guess interact with City Council. So, we got to pie Mayor Spearman on Pie Day. And in March, we actually had an opportunity to meet with City Council, which was fantastic. It was one of the most productive advocacy meetings that we've had by far this year. And then we've also had the opportunity to volunteer at some great events for the city. So there's 3 main goals on how we would like to work with the city of Lethbridge. So the first one is transit. I know you guys probably hear this a lot, but we just want to make sure that UPass continues to be accessible for students, both the actual routes and the timing of buses. We also want to see increased work opportunities. Something we talk about quite often is making sure that if students have the opportunity to work in the city, it helps them build connections, build networks, and they're more likely to stay or support Lethbridge moving forward. And the same goes for just building community outside of work. So participating in events, participating in volunteer, that type of thing, making sure that students have a network in the city. And the best way that we can accomplish these goals is together. Ultimately, the more that we work together and the more that we help students build networks and community here, the more likely they are to stay and support the city moving forward, even if they don't end up being here permanently. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you so much for having me. You can see there's 2 emails there. So I am officially done my role as of April 30th because we do elections in terms. So the top address, if you ever have any questions, is probably the best one to reach me at. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Scott. I do see that we've got some questions here in the queue. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this question is to Ms. Scott, and it was a great and a very fulsome discussion with you and the rest of your board that we had back in March, and I appreciate that. I have a question in regards to funding. So you indicated that there's funds available through bursaries and grants and so forth. 2 questions in that regard. Where does the funding come from? And is the funding available to international students as well, or only students who come from the province of Alberta and other provinces in Canada?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our funding mainly comes from student fees. So there's around $300 a semester in student fees, and then I sort of touched on levy groups, but the levy groups each get $5 per student to work with, and then the rest of it goes towards funding our student union activities. And then we also have some rental places in our cafeteria that have an extra source of income there. But yeah, most of it comes from our student fees, and all of our food bank, our health and dental plan, all of that is accessible to international students.
Okay, thanks very much for your presentation.
Councillor Crowson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. A couple of different things. I recently worked with a couple of classes at the university. I worked with 3 classes with my other volunteer hat. And so I did tours with them, I did presentations, amazing classes, they're brilliant young people. But I was also amazed at how little they knew about some of the resources in the community. Many of them were from Calgary and other places, and so some of their projects would have been much simpler if we had just connected them with organizations. What job can the city help with helping to connect students with volunteer organizations that can support them? Where do you see the role in that?
Yeah, I think honestly, there's very little connection between the university and the city, or the University Students' Union, sorry, and the city. So I think just like even having that connection and having some type of touch point, it could be the VP external or even the president, but somebody from the city of Lethbridge to say, hey, like these are the opportunities, and we have social media, we have the opportunity to interact with students, and we can get those messages out to students. I think would be the best way to start this.
And recently, Erin Phillips, chaplain of the Ecumenical Council, spoke to 100 Women Who Care and received $10,000 in funding to help with food insecurity in post-secondary students. But I'm hearing an amazing number of stories, not only about food insecurity, but people who are working full-time jobs, going to school, still can't afford food, also homelessness among post-secondary students. Can you speak a little bit so we have a better understanding of what post-secondary students are dealing with food insecurity and homelessness?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work a lot provincially as well as within the Students' Union. So in the Students' Union, specifically in Lethbridge, at the ULSU, we've seen over 50% increase in usage of our food bank, which is a very scary number. And the unfortunate reality is that it's a lot of international students who don't know how expensive it's going to be coming to Lethbridge. And so I know one of the most heartbreaking things that happened actually a few weeks ago is I was at the office a little late on a Friday, and there was a student who knocked on the door, so I said, how can I help you? And unfortunately, I didn't have the keys, I didn't have the right form, so I couldn't give him food. And so I said, I can help you get something just to tide you over for the weekend. And he was like, no, it's okay, like I'll just deal with it. But just seeing that reality that students can't afford to even like get through a weekend without food is really heartbreaking. And we hear these stats across Alberta and honestly across Canada. We work with student unions across the country, and every student union is dealing with a significant increase in their food bank usage and housing as well. I know that Lethbridge isn't necessarily as bad as Calgary or Edmonton, and so it often gets discarded when it comes to the lack of affordable housing. But we've seen a significant increase in the use of emergency grants. We went through our funding much quicker this year than we've ever gone through before, and had to pull from some different lines to make sure that students could pay rent. So.
Yeah, because I've heard of couch surfing, I've heard of master's students trying to sleep in their offices, I've heard of people sleeping in their cars. Is this what we're actually dealing with in Lethbridge?
I don't think it's quite that bad yet. I know we hear horror stories from Calgary and Edmonton specifically, but I know just being able to afford rent, that's more what we see is students coming to us saying, I don't have enough money, I don't know what to do in this situation.
And do you have any solutions?
We have our emergency grant that we can give out, but yeah, unfortunately that's only $600 and that's only once per degree. So we're trying to work with other resources, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to work with you and to bring this attention. And then I work with provincial advocacy, and so we've been doing a lot with the provincial government to make sure that they know that this is an issue and that this needs to be dealt with.
They're aware of it?
They are aware of it.
Okay. And it doesn't hurt that our CSD department is here hearing this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from other members of the committee or visitors? All right, I see none. Ms. Scott, what are some of the things we can be doing to support you and the University of Lethbridge's Students' Union in your priorities?
Yeah, I think the resources is a large thing. If there's some way that we can create a line of communication for when there's work opportunities and volunteer opportunities, we can make sure that those are spread to our students through social media or whatnot. As well, if you guys post stuff on social media and want us to repost it, we're more than happy to do that as well. And the Coffee with Council was such a great opportunity to just connect and make sure that we're on the same page and know sort of what each party is working towards. So I think, honestly, the biggest thing is just open communication here.
Perfect, thank you very much. And we do right now have a staff member that is working to liaise both with the University of Lethbridge Students' Union as well as Lethbridge College's Students' Union and work with the students on that. And I do believe if he hasn't been in touch already with your group, he will be in touch shortly to start discussing that. And today we did have some presentations with regards to what the applied studies students worked on at the City of Lethbridge over this past year. So we did see a presentation on that as well. Councillor Crowson. Or
yes, once again, thinking about connecting the communities. Last fall, the Tourism Lethbridge held a bus that people can pop on. It was free for post-secondary students. I rode on it for a while to present some local history, et cetera. It was mostly the college that was on the bus. Is something like that a useful opportunity, and how do we promote that better among students?
Yeah, I got the email about that, but I got the email, it was only about 4 or 5 days before the event, which I think was not enough time for us to like get it out. So I think as much notice as possible when promoting that is a big thing. But I think that's a really great idea. I think it's an opportunity, especially because we're on the west side. I think that a lot of students who don't have vehicles don't have the opportunity to travel. So I think it'd be really useful to get students across the city.
And I think they also did it the Friday of the Thanksgiving long weekend when anybody who could was escaping Lethbridge. So I think that was bad planning. But so it's good to know that in future, because I think our transit system is also planning something this fall. I know I got an email again to provide history on that. So hopefully that'll be something that'll work.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Any other questions at all? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Ms. Scott, for your presentation and for coming forward. I have a motion here from myself. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee receive this presentation as information. Are there any questions at all from the committee? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, thank you very much. That carries. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
All right, up next we have Andrew Malcolm, CSD General Manager, regarding the focus on better community outcomes and homelessness.
Thank you very much. So thanks for having us today to speak a little bit about focusing on better community outcomes. Next slide, please. So this presentation is really based on the fact that we have increasing challenges related to the complex social issues in our community. The strategic direction being set in plans and strategies to date were done before COVID-19, which has changed the social environment dramatically. We've seen a significant change for us with the CBO and then our OSSI funding shifting to the Lethbridge Housing Authority, and recently with the new Director of Community Services and General Manager of Community Social Development. Based on these things, we have a desire to reconnect with Council through building common understanding to guide our next steps in a strategic and aligned manner. Next slide, please. And next slide. So as I'm sure we're all aware, social issues and community safety are a leading concern of citizens in Lethbridge. It was identified in the 2022 community survey. However, many of the responsibilities around social issues are the direct mandate of other orders or levels of government. Currently, about 2% of the funding to address social issues actually comes from City of Lethbridge taxation. However, we know that navigating the complaints, the concerns, and those challenges remain in the community land on the shoulders of the city. Next slide, please. Overarching, Lethbridge does not currently have sufficient social infrastructure to address our social problems. This is not unique to Lethbridge, but cities typically dedicate significant time, effort, and money to proactively building and developing out institutional infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and the like, and typically, up to 20 years in advance. But we are very reactive with social infrastructure, typically with days, weeks, or if we're lucky, months of notice. Next slide, please. So the Community Social Development Department will be looking to complete a business plan in the next 3 to 6 months, and we want to ensure that that process starts in alignment with City Council. A business plan for us is a department strategy that aligns with the term of council, and it does not replicate or replace other plans or strategies, but consolidates and allows us to prioritize the work within them. It also acts as a natural entry point for our performance management. So there are several existing interrelated plans that we look to guide our development of this plan, including, next slide please, the Municipal Development Plan, which was approved in June of 2021, which sets a vision and policy guidance for the city. Some of the relevant sections would be around community well-being, housing, and places, including our downtowns and our neighborhoods. Next slide please. We also look at the council action plan, and so CSD-led actions represent approximately 40% of the now, next, later. Significant amount of them are still yet to be completed in their entirety. A number of them are underway. And their alignment with what we do can typically, or is historically maybe just alluded to as being healthy or diverse, but really the things that we touch on or that are interrelated are economically prosperous, culturally vibrant, well-designed, and supporting the region. Next slide, please. We have the Community Wellbeing and Safety Strategy, which was unanimously approved by Council in May of 2019. It's grounded in a needs assessment, and we acknowledge that due to the impacts of COVID-19, we need to update that to ground what we do in good, solid data that is reliable. This plan was developed after extensive data and consultation. It is a 5-year plan to improve the well-being and safety of Lethbridge, and it's the foundation, or its foundation is on coordination and integration of all the resources. Next slide, please. We also have the Municipal Housing Strategy that was targeted between 2019 and 2025, approved in 2019, and the primary goal here is to address the needs for housing across the entire continuum. Next slide, please. We also have the Clean and Safe Strategy, which was a city-led strategy developed with various stakeholders, initially developed for the downtown and then expanded to be a community-wide document. It's largely intended to be a bit of a Band-Aid solution to kind of alleviate some of the immediate pressures in the community as we work on longer-term strategies. Next slide, please. This timeline just gives a bit of a picture from 2018. I'll just draw your attention to 2022 and going forward. We're calling that a bit of a readjusting period. And two important things to note is just that the CWSS task force and the governance model were denied in June 2022, which we'll speak a little bit further in the presentation. And then that change resulting from the CBO and the OSSI responsibilities shifting away from the city. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the Community Social Development Department, or CSD at its core, is a grant management department where we administrate provincial and federal funds. Unlike many municipalities, we do not deliver social programs, nor do we own or manage social and affordable housing. In addition to grant management, we do the best that we can to address urgent social issues such as needle debris and response to requests from City Council and administration. Next slide, please. So as it relates to the CSD grant management, historically we've managed 3 portfolios, the Family and Community Support Services, or FCSS, the Outreach Support Services Initiative, or OSSI, and the Reaching Home, typically RH, which has 2 streams of designated communities and Indigenous. As of March 31st of this year, the OSSI has shifted to the Lethbridge Housing Authority, so the City of Lethbridge is no longer responsible for that administration. Each of these streams allows for an allocation of administration, which funds the CSD department. Next slide, please. So just as an overview of what our funding structure looks like, this is in 2022, and I'll just ask for the slide to go next to 2023. So we made a couple notes on the major differences. Again, the biggest difference being the shift in the OSSI funds, which I will flag as a shift in funding to the city department, and the city is not necessarily a shift in funding that's available in the community because it has just simply shifted to the Lethbridge Housing Authority for its distribution administration. But I do allude to a couple other areas where we've actually seen increased funding, which comes largely through the municipal operating budget that was approved by council in November, with additional funds for clean and safe initiatives, organizational grants, and program grants, in particular the fee assistance program and the transit for low income. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the CSD department as a whole, we are funded largely off of the administrative dollars from those other levels of government funding. So with the shift with OSSI, that is a reduction of approximately $420,000 on an annual basis, which has meant that we've had to shift our staff resources from 15 to 7, which has currently just created a little bit of a structural imbalance between our contracts and operations staff and the municipal programs, and there's a list of each of them there. Because of our contractual obligations with funders, that we can't simply just shift the staff to meet where the workload is. It's a little bit more complex for that, and that's something that we're currently managing at this point in time. Next slide, please. As I mentioned that we are currently managing this, this is really just through a growing responsibility of the distribution of funds to one that is focusing on municipal strategies. There is a pressure for us to respond and to reconfirm or kind of re-find ourselves as a department. Next slide, please. So again, our focus will be on rebuilding a department business plan that is in alignment with this council's vision and mandate, looking to rebalance that structure and focusing on strategy and action. Next slide, please. I will go fairly quickly through these because it's in another presentation today. So, but we do have the CWS.
I was actually going to say, before we move into these, because they do move into the submissions, right? And I know in talking to some members of council before we started this meeting, there was a little bit of confusion as to how that would work. So I'm actually going to suggest we take some council questions on the first part of this, if that's okay. Okay, and like I said, there was some confusion amongst council about moving straight into the funding allocations right off the bat.
There's actually two presentations. It just happens to be some repetitive slides. So I can actually skip these slides, finish this presentation, and then talk about CWSS if that.
Okay, because is this going to relate to the, does this portion relate to the submissions right away?
It does, but the presentation 5.3 is specific to the submissions.
Submissions? Okay, then sure. Yeah, keep going. I just to alert you to the fact there was some confusion with regards to that natural separation between them. So keep going ahead then.
That is fair. So we do have the CWSS Advisory Committee who's responsible for making recommendations on funding approvals. I will again skip through. Next slide, please. And next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And one more. And one more. There we go. Okay, so we will touch on that in our next presentation just to avoid duplication. So again, part of this is understanding and prioritizing a number of things that we've received, or another number of directions we've received through council over the course of the last year. So there's a list of them here in terms of those council-directed initiatives, and I won't read through them word for word, but largely around community care campus, shelter, and interim solutions. Next slide, please. What we're really trying to do is ground ourselves in the housing continuum, which is something that I know Lethbridge Housing Authority has done as well, and we look forward to working with them in partnership in common language and again, a common grounding of what our strategic initiatives will do. Next slide, please. And next slide. So as it relates to the priority areas, again, there are those 6 directives which we've broken down into priority areas of encampments, a sober shelter, comfort center, a shelter, community care campus, and a land use bylaw rewrite. So as we sit today, we're currently, and they're crossed out just because we're currently rethinking what comfort center and community care campus are, with the intention that within 6 months, as we move forward in a more strategic way, we would have an encampment strategy, a shelter strategy, and be focusing on the land use bylaw as a tool. So what we really see there is that with a solid shelter strategy, we should actually negate the need for a comfort center, that a shelter being something that is resourced appropriately to deal with those complex needs. And then from a community care campus perspective, that again with the shelter strategy, we should have a better idea of what we need and where. There has been some historic confusion around the community care campus about what it would entail and what it wouldn't entail, and the level of upfront funding and design that would take place for programs and essentially facilities that would be outside of the scope of the city. But still something that we're working on. It's not to say that they're crossed off and off the table right now. This is just how we're currently thinking of them. And then a future state where we would actually pull all those things together into a bit more of a housing continuum strategy, where we wouldn't see encampments as a standalone, but that we see them as the first entry point into moving people through the housing continuum. Next slide. So the remaining slides, there's a number in the presentation, are just pulled from previous presentations and are to be utilized by SPC members and council as supporting information. So I am happy to take any questions on that presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Malcolm, for the presentation and pulling all this information together for us. Up first in the queue, I have Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Malcolm, I've got lots of questions, as you can imagine. I will not go through all of them. Perhaps I can provide them to you and your group, your staff later on, for you to perhaps either address to me directly and or provide to this committee. But I will start with the first one on page 14. You talk about a clean and safe strategy, and you use the term MHS with no reference. Does that speak to mental health?
Just flipping to the page, I believe that is with the municipal housing strategy. Apologize for not having it
Municipal
spelled
housing
out.
strategy? Okay,
That's right.
thanks. Page 18, reaching home $2.08 million. Funds are being moved, and I don't think this is a secret, but they're being moved outside of the city. The projection is in 2024. What do you see as the potential impact on your area of work and the work that you're doing by moving those funds outside?
So I'd just like to clarify that as of today, there is no indication that those Reaching Home funds are leaving the municipal direction of the city of Lethbridge. Typically, the Reaching Home funds are used to leverage against the OSSI in other ways. But to date, again, that direction has not been provided, and we're moving forward as if the city of Lethbridge will be retaining those. That does allow us to leverage the funds as well. So in previous conversations, we've talked about how we could potentially leverage Reaching Home dollars against initiatives like our city partially municipally funded outreach services. And so when we have multiple pots, it really allows us to kind of build funding that best leverages to get the programs that we need in our community. With the shift of OSSI, that does limit our ability to do that, taking one pot away. That's, again, not to say that there's going to be an impact on programming in the community. But right now, again, Reaching Home is currently with the city and is something that we'd like to engage with council on as to, that desire to keep it beyond 2024.
Okay, thanks, because you do speak to it on page 21 where you indicate that some employees cannot simply be shifted. What do you mean by that? Are you suggesting that they can't be shifted to another agency who might provide a service, or they can't simply take on new responsibilities?
That's an acknowledgement that primarily our operational and grant side of our operation in CSD, they have specific roles as per the contract, and that with the Reaching Home and FCSS funds that we can use for administration, but that administrative time actually has to be directed towards the implementation of FCSS and Reaching Home programs. So we can't simply take administrative dollars from those grants and then spend all of our time doing municipal tasks.
Okay, understood. All right, the other questions that I have, I will send to you and other members of this committee, and if you can respond back through appropriate channels, then that would be great. Thank you.
Councillor Crowson?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report and for the work that you are doing in rebuilding a department. I've mentioned it before, but incompetence bubbles are very difficult to fix and to replace. So is there anything that council can do to support rebuilding this department?
I think, first is an awareness of the situation that we're in and our limitations currently with tax-funded positions to deliver those tax-based programs or tasks. So from the clean and safe perspective, and then with grant or operational grants like our fee assistance program and our community event support grant and programs like that, we have the money for the program. We don't necessarily have the tax-funded support for the staff to deliver those programs. So previously, when we had a staff of 15, with some of that OSSI funding, all staff were doing a little bit of municipal tasks off the side of their desk as they were able to. We've lost that side of desk capacity in a number of different ways, and so we are currently just trying to figure that out right now.
Staffing is one of the main issues in the department. One of the things I don't think people realize about Lethbridge, we seem this prosperous community, but we have one of the highest child poverty rates in Canada. Our average household income is $35,000 less than the Alberta average. And we have one of the highest poverty rates of any city in Alberta. So how are we going to address poverty through the work that you're doing?
I might ask Ms. Motts to speak to that, but I think in terms of, that really falls into the prevention side of things and what would be programmed through our FCSS dollars, but I'll certainly let Ms. Motts provide a more wholesome response.
I would agree that the utilization of our FCSS prevention and early intervention programming is key there. We also work in partnership with other organizations in this community that support education and employment mobility services, which is not necessarily the mandate specifically of any of the social funding that we hold within community social development, but we work in partnership with them. Community social development also utilized some grant funding last year to work with the Shenla committee to do a study on child poverty within the city of Lethbridge, which was presented to City Council in early and mid 2022. So if there was a desire for community social development to continue working with the Shenla committee on their initiatives, we could do that.
And finally, we match the minimum 20% required by FCSS, which is about $700K. Do other communities exceed the minimum?
I believe our percentage is just over 20%, 22, 23%, something like that. And I think it's a mix. Some just hit the bare minimum and some exceed, and I think in some circumstances quite drastically exceed.
And could a community that's dealing with the poverty we have, could increasing FCSS funding be something that could substantially improve those outcomes?
Say that any increase in funding is likely to increase outcomes. I will note that we were made aware that there was an increase in funding in the most recent provincial budget in FCSS. We haven't got the details as to how much each municipality would receive, and then how that might impact our matching fund. But I'll put it out there that if that amount might drive up what we need for our matching contribution if we want to leverage it.
And of course, we can always do more than matching. All right, thank you very much.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm, for the report and all the accompanying information. A lot of my questions, I think, have already been asked. If I can go back to the CBO OSSI change, and I believe, Mr. Malcolm, you said that it really will have no impact in community on the programs or services offered. The main impact that we're feeling is the administration dollars that we no longer have. Can you maybe unpack that a little for me? Because in my experience, when you start saying, put a little funding over here and a little funding over here and a little funding over here, a little funding over here, it sort of splinters and can, in some cases, can even duplicate programming, which could be a waste. Can you maybe tell me how we and other community organizations and the new CBO are ensuring that things are targeted, and so we're not seeing waste or duplication?
Thanks for the question. I think you've hit the nail on the head in that when all the pots are together, it allows for the maximum amount of leverage, and that the distribution of them are done in maximum strategic way, the maximum to maximize the funds. When I say that we don't see the impact in the community, and that's just because the change has been too recent, and we certainly hope Lethbridge Housing Authority and us are partnered, and that we can make sure that there isn't a drop, and if there is any change, it's actually an increase. But it's just too early to say. In terms of the impacts for us, it is just that it was a staff reduction, and that those staff that were reduced all were doing different municipal tasks off the side of their desk. So again, it's probably too early to say. The most immediate impact has just strictly been within our staffing structure and that immediate change.
Okay, thank you. So it's something we need to monitor to ensure that we're not seeing a splintering or a duplication, and things are focused. So thank you for that. Another question, Mr. Malcolm, you talked about grant management as the primary, it's the core mandate, I think you call it. I've closed my presentation. I think you said the core management of CSD is now grant management. And then further, I think you said this is unlike many other communities. Is that typical of larger communities? I'm just trying to figure out if the larger communities are the ones who mostly do the grant management and put it out into community, or maybe it's the smaller communities that do it. I'm trying to figure out is how we've gotten to where we've gotten. I'm just doing grant management.
So I have to admit that we don't have a municipal table of comparison in front of me, but it doesn't necessarily correlate directly with size of municipality. It is, I think, more in terms of desire of the municipality. But we would say that many other municipalities have more operational staff, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're delivering the programs of, an FCSS or a Reaching Home, but they are certainly more operational in the social service sector and in dealing with potential social related issues in the community.
I saw Miss Motts there say so I wasn't sure she was going to jump in.
Yeah, if I don't mind, I'll let Ms. Motts speak to the FCSS model for municipal employees.
Thank you.
Yeah, just through the FCSS funding specifically, most municipalities that receive FCSS funding would have a hybrid model of having municipally funded staff, both operating programs as well as managing the grant funding through service providers in their community.
And thank you. And just because Councillor Crowson touched on it a bit about poverty, we had, pardon me, a community-based organization, not a CBO, in fact, but just a community board called Vibrant Lethbridge. For some time, I was part of it. It sort of disappeared when we tried to reorganize CSD. Is there any thought of reinvigorating that and bringing all the parties together? They were doing some excellent work on poverty reduction initiatives several years back. And when we reorganized CSD, it was one of the ones that disappeared, I was told, for 6 months, and it's been several years now. Is there any thought of being able to revisit or rebuild those types of organizations?
I'm probably running out of opportunities to play the new card, but I will say it's something that's certainly been on my radar in the last 6 weeks. Is that probably as of over 4 years ago, we supported a number of different groups like Vibrant Lethbridge, quite hands-on, Age Friendly, and Shenla, a couple other groups. When we shifted and we stepped away from being able to provide our support to all those different groups, and our focus was on supporting the CWSS Advisory Committee as kind of the hub of all community well-being. And I think what we did is we moved from one side of the spectrum all the way to the other, and now we're kind of just trying to figure out where we can shift back to support those other organizations in the community. And then there's some level of prioritization and understanding where our effort would go, because there are so many in our community who are asking for our involvement and our support. So it's something that's on our radar, and we'd love to be able to support them all. It's just, again, it's a resourcing limitation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Malcolm. You're speaking to some of the right members who allocate the funds. So I think it's good learnings for us. And just a final comment, if I can, Madam Chair. Mr. Malcolm, you just brought up Age Friendly. Are we making a connection? I know that we're one of the few communities in Alberta that doesn't have any municipal connection to their Age Friendly groups. But we are trying to make those connections, are we? Or again, is it just capacity?
Yeah, so again, we've had probably a fairly long absence from supporting Age Friendly. We've re-engaged in the last month. We had several city members who attended their last meeting, and the ask of that group is that city might be able to position to support administrative of the committee, like agendas, minutes, chairing, those types of things, and we just at this point in time simply don't have the resources. So our last communication back to Age Friendly Group was that we would definitely desire in multiple city departments to be aware of their meetings and to attend as possible and to participate as much as possible, but taking an administrative role is something that we just don't have the resources for. And if that's something that they wish to do or see, that they might be inclined to reach out to an SPC or council to make that request.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have any other questions from members of this committee or other members of council that have joined us? All right, I do not see any. I do have a couple questions. On page 18 of the presentation, the funds for family community support services as well as reaching home, where we've got 2.5 million listed for FCSS and 2.8 million listed for reaching home. Is that for 4 years? Is that for 1 year? What is that term on that?
Those would be the annual allocations.
So those are annual allocations? Okay. Thank you very much for the clarification on that. And then when I go to page 20 of the slide under the 2023 funding infrastructure, under the reaching home dollars, the 2.08 million, we've got the less 1,100,000 there. What was the 1,100,000? How did that come out of that?
That was just a shift due to COVID dollars.
Okay.
We received an influx during COVID, and that was just an adjustment.
Okay, because I didn't see any explanation for that, so thank you very much for the clarification on that. And then as we move through the presentation a bit more, I'm just trying to find the page. On page 32 of the presentation under the council-directed initiatives, on April 22nd, we had a motion to approve $100,000 from council contingencies to procure a consultant, and that was to conduct community engagement for the creation of Made in Lethbridge Community Care Campus and the other points under that. Now, we know that that didn't happen. So where did the $100,000 that council approved, where did that go to? And since council made that as a motion, how is that going to be replaced? What are we doing instead?
Maybe let our treasurer speak to where it is. I believe it's still sitting in a BAU, but I'll look for his confirmation.
That is correct.
So what are we doing instead of that? Because council made the motion, we've decided to replace that. So help myself as well as anybody who's watching this, the public, help us understand how that's going or where that's gone to or what that's been replaced with.
We're currently working, again, we see the community care campus component and the comfort center components coming together within a shelter strategy, which is where administration's focus is on right now, and we hope to bring that forward to council or SPC and council in the very near future, at which point we would be putting in front, getting actual direction to say that initiative or past direction is in fact no longer, and then reallocating or providing direction on those funds. So right now it is still live. We are just not active in its pursuit. What we've turned our attention to is a more wholesome shelter strategy.
So you'll bring that strategy forward, and when that comes forward, will be an explanation to the community as well as to council as to why and how that shifted.
That is
Correct?
the intent.
Okay. Under that as well, we have November 2022, begin the process of new direct control bylaw for current shelter and complete all 3 readings before the end of Q1 2023. We are past Q1 2023. Can we get an update on where that might be at?
Yeah, I do have Mr. Bartholow here with us, who's leading that as our city applicant. But I will say that we are behind, but there is an open house for adjacent landowners this evening. So we're well underway, and I believe our intent is to get it in a public hearing by the or to our approval, hopefully, by the end of by the start of Q3.
Okay, and council will be getting the results of tonight's public engagement session at that public hearing as well, correct?
That is correct. We will work on a What We Heard report that will accompany the submission at that point in time.
And that'll be made available to the public when that all comes together and that goes into a council package. That will also be made available to the public, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much on that. And then just following up on something Councillor Middleton Hope said with regards to the Reaching Home funding, it's not that it's actually moving at the end of March 31st, 2024. We just know that our current contract with the federal government is up at the end of March 31st, 2024. At that point, we don't know whether our contract will be renewed or whether those Reaching Home dollars will be moved to somewhere else, correct?
That is correct, and I think what administration would prefer is that if there's a desire either way to make a strong push to retain or a push to look to say to the government, we don't want to be involved in this anymore, that we have as much advance notice as possible so that, again, when we're working on business plan and working on our structure, we can do so with as much time as possible.
Okay, but right now, as far as it stands, it may or may not be renewed at the end of March.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all my questions. Did anybody else have any further questions at all? All right, seeing none, this is item 5.2. This is coming from Councillor Palladino. Focus on better community outcomes, homelessness. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee received this presentation as information. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I think it gives us and ultimately council an update on the current state of the Community and Social Development Department. It also provides good information regarding the social issues within the city and to reconnect with City Council to build a common understanding of where we are. It will also help guide our future actions and decisions in solving these complex problems. So this is submitted to you or to us for information only. So unless there are further questions, I would call for the vote for this to go to council as a whole.
All right, I do not see any questions at all. We'll call for the vote. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. All right, we will move on to item 5.3 again. So Mr. Malcolm, with regards to CWSS funding allocation requests, and I will just provide the clarity again that this relates to items 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and 6.4. So just if members of the committee could please keep that in mind, that this is an introduction and an explanation of those submission items that we're looking at next.
Very much for that introduction. So just before I get into this one, I just wanted to note that on the purpose of the actual report itself, it notes 3 funding requests, and on slide 6 it notes 3. There's actually 4. So when I get to that slide, I will note the 4th one. Next slide, please. So again, I won't want it to be too repetitive, but CSD's main core mandate is the grant management. Next slide, please. The funding that we are speaking about today is specifically around the Reaching Home, which is the $2.08 million. Again, 2 streams. One is designated communities and one is Indigenous. Next slide, please. So the CWSS Advisory Committee was established in 2020 to define the priorities and leverage collective impact in alignment with the CWSS, or Community Wellbeing and Safety Strategy. It's composed of key community partners and sector leaders who are responsible for using their expertise to make funding allocation recommendations for social services within the community. Based on a resolution of May of 2019, City Council continues to function as the interim decision-making body on FCSS and Reaching Home. So again, the CWSS Advisory Committee provides recommendations to Council. Next slide, please. So how do we allocate CWSS grant funding? It starts with a confirmation from our funders about the amount of funding we do have. And then we look to make funding recommendations from administration to the CWSS Advisory Committee for engagement. Those that align proceed through procurement and then back with the CWSS Advisory Committee for a recommendation. Then we proceed for a request for decision, and SPCN Council would vote and approve that allocation, and we move into operational agreements. And then beyond the operational agreement, our team does the ongoing performance management of that agreement. I will just draw attention to that in this chart. It's been very linear. It shows the CWSS Advisory Committee recommendation occurring before the request for decision. We are up against some very tough timelines in the distribution of this. So when today's agenda was actually published last week, which was ahead of Monday's advisory committee meeting, if those decisions of the committee had varied from being what was presented, those agenda or that information would have been brought forward to this SPC. Next slide, please. So again, this is the slide that has 3 of the 4. And so the one that is missing is the by names list. So the 4 that we are bringing forward today are the Blackfoot Resource Hub facility funding, the Homeless Individuals and Families Information System, or HIFIS, Senior Support Navigator, and the by names list. Next slide, please. So an overview of the Blackfoot Resource Hub facility funding. So the Blackfoot Resource Hub, the goals are to ensure accessibility to cultural supports, to ensure equal access to programs and services, improve the quality of life for Indigenous peoples and communities, and to provide culturally appropriate information and referral services to prevent and reduce homelessness. This funding comes specifically from the Indigenous stream of Reaching Home. And in our original funding allocation, it did not contemplate facility expenses, as at that point in time, we were looking at utilization of a city facility in kind. And since that time, as they've gone to a private facility, there are facility expenses related to their lease or rent space. This would result in a new maximum contract value of $536,000 annually. Next slide, please. And the request for decision is there, which is consistent with the submissions. Next slide, please. The second item is the Homeless Individuals and Families Information System, or HIFIS. So this is a client information management system, which would effectively replace the one that we are using today, which is called ETO. Working on my acronyms. ETO, which is something that is in alignment with the provincial government, which we had access through the OSSI. We've been granted an additional year of access to that, but we will need to have a replacement system going forward. This is to maintain our contractual requirements with Reaching Home, and it ensures a system that is available for client-level data for us and for reporting. So this would be federal Reaching Home funding, up to $50,000 annually, which isn't the same in every year, which is detailed in the submission document. And again, the first year having additional expenses for those initial IT startup costs. Next slide, please. Again, the request for decision is there. I'll skip to the next slide, please. So the by names list. This is to develop and maintain a comprehensive by names list, which is again to align with contractual requirements of Reaching Home. This allows us to ensure access to current, comprehensive, and reliable client data among all our key stakeholders. It essentially is a database for those that are experiencing homelessness in our community. It would be utilizing the federal Reaching Home funding, and would be to award $120,000 annually over a 4-year term to the Blood Tribe Department of Health. This is a direct award, which we've confirmed with our procurement as well as with the Government of Canada, due to the unique nature of needing the shelter operator to be the one who is populating that data. Next slide, please. And again, the request for decision. Next slide. And the fourth and final is the Senior Support Navigator, which would be to fund one FTE position to the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization to provide housing and homeless service referrals with the senior population and to work with integrated with our local population across our integrated coordinated access system. This is, again, federal Reaching Home funding, up to $70,000 annually to LSCO. Which was done through a direct award after a competitive process. So the initial competitive process didn't meet the requirements of the bid, and then we entered into commercial negotiations, which were successful. Next slide, please. And next slide. So we are open to answering questions on those specific items at this presentation point, or you are free to save them for the individual submissions or a combination of the two.
All right, we have a few questions lined up here. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
And thank you. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm, again for another robust presentation. I'd like to draw your attention to 6.1, the Blackfoot Resource Hub. The recommendation from CWSS is to increase funding to the Blood Tribe to pay for leased space. Can you confirm that we're currently providing $496,248 for the purpose of operating the resource hub?
That is correct.
And the $40,000 would be in addition to that?
That is correct.
Is Red Crow College the location of the hub, and are they charging rent to the Blackfoot Resource Hub?
Yes, that is the current location and are currently the ones that they would be paying rent to.
Okay, and do we know what that rent is?
It is just under the 40,000. We do know that they are having conversations around whether that is the best location. So there was a small buffer put in place just in case they do need to go to an alternate location.
Okay, and how much space are they using?
Apologize, Councillor. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, that's okay. Did you have something further to add to that, or can I go on to the next question?
There was a comment at our advisory committee on Monday that their preference would be for their location to become more central, to be more effective for the programming. So it's something that that we will enter into conversations with them about.
Okay, and how much space do they require? How much space do they have now that you're anticipating they will require $40,000 a year for?
I don't have that number at my fingertips. I'll just give a pause to see if someone on our team may be able to answer that.
Sure, we can move along to the next couple of questions and then get me out of the queue. How's that?
That's great.
The funds that you've suggested, the $40,000, is to come from Reaching Home funds. So those are federal dollars. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good. All right. So if and you've made a couple of proposals here. One is to provide the funding and a potential outcome, and one is not to provide the funding and a potential outcome. So what do you perceive are the real or tangible impacts that not providing the funding might have?
So without the additional funding, the additional funding that they require would come from the existing agreement, which would effectively impact their planned or their programs, or sorry, their operations of their programs. And I'll let Ms. Mott speak to what the specifics behind that.
So as Mr. Malcolm stated, if we were not to approve this allocation today, we would have to reduce the current service levels within the existing agreement, which we would expect to come out of the current project delivery expenses, which would be likely tied to a reduction in elder honorariums, which would mean less support from elders for this work.
Okay, Ms. Motz, is that a guess, or have we been told by the Blackfoot Resource personnel that that's where the funding would impact?
In our initial conversations with Blood Tribe administration, that was the line item that we have discussed would be reduced should this allocation not be approved.
Okay, so is that being done because that's the most expedient, or is that likely to garner the greatest response?
That line item is selected in an effort to not reduce current staffing within the agreement, and because there's the most flexibility in it in terms of service levels. There are line items within this existing budget that are fixed costs and cannot be reduced, and so that line item was selected as it is not a fixed cost and would be tied solely to service levels.
Okay, are there any other, in terms of looking at how robust that budget might be, are there any areas where there might be efficiencies realized?
This is a fairly new program. It's only been operational since October of 2022. So at this time, we believe that that is the only line item that could be reduced and have the most minimal impact.
Okay. Last question then. How would funds provided by the Government of Canada be returned? And why would contractual deadlines not be met by providing the funding?
So are you referring to our agreement with Reaching Home or within this group specifically?
Well, I'm suspecting that it's probably the Reaching Home funding, because contained in the presentation indicates that funds may have to be returned to the Government of Canada.
That's correct.
So I'm wondering if you could perhaps just address that.
So any funds within our current Reaching Home funding portfolio that are not allocated, we risk returning to the Government of Canada, which is why we've selected this funding source to be utilized for this allocation.
Okay, so why would those funds not be utilized?
Well,
Because you're not going to get the $40,000 additional?
No, so I think so right now we have, the 40,000 is coming from currently unallocated Reaching Home dollars. So if we carry forward with unallocated Reaching Home dollars at the year end, there's no guarantee that those continue to stay in our community. If we tie it into this agreement, our expectation would be that they would be spent, but then we would also be doing quarterly reporting, and so we would know what their lease that they've locked into, and then we would be managing that and what would be unspent. But the expectation would be, if it's in an agreement, it's to be spent.
Okay, and lastly, then you're looking for a decision. Obviously, this to move back to council for an ultimate decision, I guess, or the next decision process. You've indicated that they are currently looking for additional space or different space. Is the request likely to still come forward?
So the conversation is ongoing. I don't know if they're actively looking for the space, but I would anticipate, or we anticipate, that any other space that they look at will have a cost, and that cost will be equal, if not slightly more, which is why we built in a little bit of a buffer so that we wouldn't have to come back again if the number is higher.
Okay, that answers my questions. Thank you very much.
Do any other members of council have any questions with regards to this specific funding allocation request? And if I understand correctly, Mr. Malcolm, you will entertain questions for any of the allocation requests from 6.1 to 6.4 at this time as well?
Yep.
So does anybody have any questions with regards to 6.1 through 6.4 as well? All right, seeing none, I do have a couple questions. One is actually a statement to start with. On each one of these funding requests, and Mr. Malcolm, you addressed it a little bit, understanding the timelines are tight and when things come forward. This package was available to the public last Thursday. The CWSS Advisory Committee meeting did not meet until Monday, but on the package presentations or on the package summary sheets, it does say they have been engaged and voted in favor to recommend this request go forward. I would ask that in future you list the date as to when they're going to meet and that it will be brought forward if it's approved. I had a few disconcerted members of that committee contact me to say they hadn't approved any of this yet, and they were concerned that their names were on it. So for that, I would just ask that that clarification is put on there, because right now it is also out in the public, as of last Thursday, that group had met and approved all of these. I do understand what you're saying about the timelines of meetings, but that wording really has to be watched.
Yeah, absolutely. Point taken, and we'll ensure that in the future.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. So I guess the question I have, since we understand that the Reaching Home funding may or may not be renewed at the end of March, what happens, because several of these are four-year requests, what happens if that Reaching Home, if we approved four-year requests, but the Reaching Home funding ends? Is the city still responsible for the next 3 years? I know we provide some clarification in the motions about that, but is the city then going to be responsible for funding out the 3 years of those, or do we just fund that through the Reaching Home? We get that one, and then the funding is done, and then it moves on to whoever is administering the funding after that.
I may stumble over the proper words, but essentially what we do is we approve a 4-year, but we enter into 1-year agreements. And the last piece of the recommendation where it speaks to pending available funding of the Government of Canada would be our piece that if it wasn't renewed and we were no longer getting the funds, that we would cease the agreement.
Okay, and that's what I do see there. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding properly that it would be a to March 31st agreement, and then if the federal government shifts that funding, that the City of Lethbridge is not responsible for the rest of that funding unless something else came forward or other requests came forward.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you for understanding, or thank you for helping me out with that. On the request for the hub, the Blackfoot Resource Hub program, we have that set to end on December 31st, 2024. I'm a little confused by that date, because would we not then set that to end by March 31st, 2024, if that's when the Reaching Home funding might be renewed or not? Would we not fund them for $40,000 to the March 31st and then renew it?
I am going to let Ms. Mott speak to that. She's much more in the know on that one.
So that's correct. All of the currently funded Reaching Home FCSS agreements are in place until March 31st of 2024. So we had put December 31st, 2024, because that's when the procurement ends for this service. So regardless of funding approvals or having funding available, all CWSS funding agreements have to be reprocured for the 2025 calendar year, should we still have Reaching Home and FCSS funding.
So the reprocurement would start in
2024.
But it would start with, it would have an end date of December 31st, 2024 with a start date for January 2025. It wouldn't be an end date of March 31st, 2024 with a start date of April 1st, 2024?
The agreement would have an end date of March 31st, 2024, because that's when our agreement with Reaching Home ends, but we're hoping to have the approval valid until the end of the procurement term, which would be December of
December is the end of the
2024.
okay, so that's the end of the procurement plan. Okay, I was confused around that because it seemed that didn't fall within the Reaching Home end date. But if that falls within the procurement date, then that makes sense, although it might be nice to get them more money starting April 1st.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That's all the questions I have. I see Councillor Crowson has a question.
There's been a lot of talk about the Reaching Home money. How long have we had a contract with the federal government? Relatively, I'm sure nobody knows the exact date. This isn't something we've just fallen into recently, right? This has been an ongoing contract that gets renewed often with the government. And so the idea that we're not going to get a renewal is sort of unusual. Would that be correct?
That is correct. Yeah, our understanding has been about 10 years. I don't know if the treasurer knows exactly.
My apologies, I have to ask that question again.
How long we've had Reaching Home?
Not exactly. I know it's probably been at least 10 years.
And we've never been out of step with them. We've always maintained the program well. They would have no reason not to renew our contract.
Best of my knowledge, we've always been well within our really good terms with our funder. And so I have no reason to believe that there would be any sort of reason that they would switch from that point of view.
It would only be if there's a group actively trying to change that. Otherwise, we would be moving ahead as business as usual. Okay, thank
That's
you.
our understanding.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have any other questions before we move on here? All right, so item 5.3, I have Councillor Carlson on for this one, this motion, CWSS funding allocation request outcome. And again, this is the summary presentation for these. This is not at this point approving those funding requests. We're going to move on and do those next. So, Councillor Carlson, be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee received this presentation as information. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Malcolm and his team, Ms. Motts as well, for their information and presentation. I'll call for the vote.
Question's been called. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, that carries.
So we'll move on to the submissions. Item 6.1. Our submission. I thought you said something. This one comes from myself, Blackfort Resource Hub Facility Funding Allocation Request. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council adopt the following recommendation of CWSS Advisory Committee regarding funding from the federal Reaching Home funding portfolio. Approve up to $40,000 annually to be allocated from Reaching Home funding as an amended addition to the previously approved annual operational budget to the Blood Tribe Kainai Nation to support the continued operation of the Blackfoot Resource Hub program set to end on December 31st, 2024. And further be it resolved that the city manager and city clerk be authorized to sign an appropriate amended funding agreement, and such agreement shall be subject to continuous administrative review and operational renewal at the discretion of the City of Lethbridge pending available funding from the Government of Canada. Does anybody have any comments, questions with regards to this? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Councillor Carlson, I didn't see your vote on that. In favor? Perfect. Thank you very much. None opposed, so that carries. Item 6.2, this is Councillor Palladino. By names list project funding allocation request. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council adopt the following recommendation of the CWSS Advisory Committee with funding from the Federal Reaching Home funding portfolio. Approve up to $120,000 of Federal Reaching Home funding annually over a 4-year term to be allocated to the Blood Tribe Department of Health to deliver the by names list project. And further be it resolved that the city manager and city clerk be authorized to sign the appropriate funding agreement, and such agreement shall be subject to continuous administrative review and operational renewal at the discretion of the City of Lethbridge pending available funding from the Government of Canada. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you. Let's see if I can put a bow on this. This funding request is to approve $120,000 annually over 4 years to the Blood Tribe Department of Health to deliver the by names list project. This would be a real-time, up-to-date list of all known people experiencing homelessness in the community. It would also include valuable data required to understand the inflow and outflow of homelessness at a system level. The BNL is a contractual expectation from the federal government, so option 2, rejecting the proposal, isn't appealing. I would suggest we bump this up to the full council level. If there are no further questions, I'd call the question.
Does anybody have any further questions with regards to this? All right, seeing none, all in favor? Councillor Carlson, can you just wave your hand? You were off to the side. There you go. Thank you. That passes. Thank you very much. Councillor Carlson, I have Senior Supports Navigator Funding Allocation Request. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that City Council adopt the following recommendations of the CWSS Advisory Committee with funding from the Reaching Home funding portfolios. Approve up to $70,000 annually to be allocated from the Reaching Home funding portfolio as an amended addition to the previously approved annual operational budget to the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization to fund a Senior Support Navigator. And further be it resolved that the city manager and city clerk be authorized to sign the appropriate funding agreement, and such agreement shall be subject to continuous administrative review and operational renewal at the discretion of the City of Lethbridge pending available funding from the Government of Alberta and the Government of Canada. All in favor? Or are there any additional questions with regards to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very pleased to support this. I hope I get the support of my colleagues to send this to council. This is a pretty important position in our community. The seniors navigators provide connections to our senior population, to the whole continuum of care and referrals and follow-up supports. I really hope we support this. Thank you.
Question's been called. All in favor? All right, Councillor. Yeah. See, I have a split screen between Councillor Campbell and Councillor Carlson, so I can't always see both your hands. That motion carries. Thank you very much. Oh, and we've got the pug in the back seat voting. All right, this one from myself: homeless individuals and families information system funding allocation request. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommend that the City Council adopt the following recommendations of the CWSS Advisory Committee with funding from the Federal Reaching Home Funding Portfolio. Approve $50,000 of Federal Reaching Home funding annually for a 4-year term to be allocated for the implementation of Homeless Individuals and Families Information System, HIFIs. And further be it resolved that the city manager and city clerk be authorized to sign the appropriate funding agreements, and such agreements shall be subject to continuous administrative review and operational renewal at the discretion of the City of Lethbridge, pending available funding from the Government of Canada. I do have a question with regards to this one that I forgot to ask previously. Does anybody else have any questions on this? Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm not in the queue.
Okay. Councillor Campbell, I see you have your hand raised. You have a question?
I was just going to, wasn't a question, I was just going to wait for debate. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Campbell, you'll have to speak up.
Sorry, I was just going in for debate.
Oh, okay. Okay. On this one, the question I have for this is we do still have access to the province's data system right now, though, correct?
That is correct. We were approved to be on it for, until March of 2024.
The end of March 2024. And so we do have a year worth of that, and we could look at doing this next year then, instead of this year.
Not really, because there's quite a long process, probably about 6 months in terms of getting the IT set up and the transition. So if we waited until March of 2024, we would be 6 months without a program, and therefore out of contractual, or in alignment with our contract.
Okay, and we wouldn't be able to work with anybody else on access with the Government of Alberta system? Our relationships aren't built there yet?
We could make that request. I think the other piece is that HIFIS seems to be the kind of the new industry standard, and a number of individuals are looking, or other folks are looking to move away from ETO. So it is seen as well as a contractual move. Because of that, it's also a best practice move.
Okay, and would we use this for anything else other than Reaching Home or OSSI funding? Is there other reasons? Would we be able to use this for FCSS funding or anything like that?
We wouldn't know until we implemented the system.
Okay, and can we do some investigation into that?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Campbell, you have, or you're in for debate. Anybody else have any questions at all? All right, seeing none, I'll open debate on this one. I certainly appreciate the other projects coming forward. On this one, I would like to hold off on approving this project until we know what we can use it for. Also, I'd like a little bit more information on whether we can be working with other groups who have access to who are going to have access to this, as well as any other groups who might be able to work with us or that we might be able to work with on this system. And I'd also like to know what other things we can access through this system before we actually approve it. We're looking at, I know, $50,000 on this. So at this time, I will not be approving this just because I feel like I need a bit more information on this particular system, and thinking ahead to looking at, and well, I know that our Reaching Home contract has always been renewed. I always take a look at the potential of what happens if it's not. So I would like to hold on that until we get a little bit more information as to whether we can use this for more things moving forward. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion. I just, first and foremost, want to thank Andrew, Malcolm, and everybody for bringing the information forward. This is an opportunity to see all of the work that needs to be done. I know there's time sensitivity, and the faster we get it before council to make these approvals, the better it is. So I will be supporting the resolution as I've supported all the other resolutions. Thank you.
Councillor Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too will be supporting this. I think we've learned in the past that when we dither, then we sometimes get caught flat-footed. when crunch time comes. I think the recommendation that's come forward is to start transitioning now so that we're not under the gun and we can maintain our funder fidelity. I think dilly-dallying and waiting on this may leave us not able to reach our commitment. So I will be in full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in for debates? All right, I have nothing further on that, so I will call for the vote. All in favor? And thank you, Councillor Carlson. And opposed? So that one fails, but that does mean we can still bring this back for more discussion at our next council meeting. So while it failed, we can still pull that out of the consent agenda for more discussion at that. And at that time, I would ask that you bring back some of the extra information. All right? Thank you very much. And thank you very much for bringing the presentations forward, as well as the recommendations from that committee. Up next, Mr. Malcolm, we have a submission with regards to Affordable and Social Housing Capital Project Grant Request, Green Acres Foundation. This is a motion coming from Councillor Carlson. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee recommends that City Council approve the allocation of $1.5 million from the funding held reserves as matching funds for future projects from the 2022-2031 Capital Improvement Program adopted in the June 1st, 2021 meeting of Council to the Green Acres Foundation for construction of the Abbey Road Terrace project. Councillor Carlson, or does anybody have any questions with regards to this? Councillor Carlson, did you want to introduce this?
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to open it up to questions. I had a few questions myself.
Okay, and Councillor Carlson, you are first in the queue.
Well, there we go. Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to, I guess, Mr. Malcolm, I'm sorry, my internet is not allowing me to open this for some reason. But this is in accordance with our policy, correct?
That is correct. It is in alignment with the policy.
In alignment with the policy. But we are out of dollars, correct?
That is correct. So the available funding specifically for Affordable and Social Housing Capital Grant have been fully allocated. There are a number of those allocated dollars that were contingent on the federal approval of the rapid housing projects. So there is the potential that if one or more of those projects is not successful, that funds would come back into the pot. But as we sit today without that decision, all funding is currently allocated, and the city treasurer has identified an alternative funding source should council still wish to proceed.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple other questions, but I'll see if my colleagues have questions.
Certainly, Councillor Palladino.
Thank you. We have a serious shortage of shelter-like housing in the municipality, and I'm wondering, I think we call it social infrastructure, but I'm wondering if this is good bang for our buck at $1.5 million here is the ask.
Know that the biggest shortage and the most challenging ones to get approved are in our transitional and supportive housing realm of the continuum of housing continuum. In terms of bang for your buck, I think what we would do is we would relate to how we've funded these projects in the past. Typically around the $30,000 to $35,000 a unit. This one does come in high at $120,000 a unit. So in terms of bang for your buck, that's what we would use to draw our conclusions to. We're currently in a process of hopefully moving towards getting better data to help us inform where the true gaps are, but right now our understanding is it's with transitional and supportive housing.
Give me those numbers once again. Typically $35,000 a door.
The last attachment in the package had some of the number breakdowns. So our average against other funded projects has been $34,000 a unit. And this one is coming in at 120.
12 units? Or
15 affordable units, 25 total. There's 25 total projects or units in the project, 15 of which are affordable that qualify for the program.
Councillor Crowson?
Thank you very much, Chair. Let me be blunt, and I know Ms. Kozlovi is here. Does the project need this money, or does the project want this money? Would it go ahead without the money or not?
Thank you for the question. We are presently in the midst of constructing this. We have, the Board of Directors is quite committed to making more affordable seniors housing in this city. And yes, we would like it, but would we stop if we didn't get it? No, I have to be honest. We will still keep going. We are committed to seniors housing for Lethbridge.
Okay, so this is not a necessity. This is more doing your due diligence and looking for all possible sources of funding.
Yeah, I got to be honest. It truly is, because we won't stop building.
Thank you very much for your honesty.
Councillor Palladino, I have you back up for another question. Okay. Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if Ms. Kozlovi, if you could come back up and just respond, I guess, to one comment. So what it looks like here is we're being asked to provide $1.8 million in total, 300,000 before, 1.5 now, on a total project of $9.144 million. And you indicated that you would continue to operate or moving forward with the construction of this project, regardless of whether the additional funds come or not. Does that infer that there is an additional source that we're unaware of for the funds?
There's always banks. So we know that we do have the collateral that if we needed to, that we could go to a financial institution to get it, the funding for it. Unfortunately, and you're absolutely right, we are asking for more. We did just follow the instructions on the application where it said you could go for 30%, so that's what we did.
Okay, good. So the 1.8 then would be a portion of the 9.144, or is that in addition to?
No, that would be a portion of it. That would help pay for the 9.114.
And is this project in a position of overrun at this point, or are we on budget?
We're still on budget.
Okay. One last question in regards to taxation dollars that go from the public stream through to Green Acres Foundation. Are those funds in any way, shape, or form being applied to the development of this project? I know that may be difficult to kind of siphon off and provide us with some insights, but I'm just wondering if our taxpayers recognize that we are paying funds directly from taxation to Green Acres. Are we looking at operational funds, or are we looking at developmental funds as a portion of that?
Well, first of all, the taxation dollars that Green Acres requisitions to the tax base cannot be used for this project. The tax under the Alberta Housing Act, housing management bodies like Green Acres have requisitioning authority, but it is only for those lodge services. This is not a lodge. This is a self-contained unit. So
good. No, I want a clarification on that in the event that members of the public were listening and saying, well, hey, my tax dollars, some of my tax dollars go to Green Acres. So thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Ms. Kozlovi.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Middleton. Ms. Kozlovi, can I just follow up with another question on that? Because I was going to ask, since it does not qualify for the municipal requisition funds, you said it's only for lodge services. This is a self-contained unit. Can you help me understand what the difference between the two is? Because I don't know.
Sure. And this is really quite confusing. The lodges we provide, very simply, we provide meal service, housekeeping service, and activities, things like this. And we also have them staffed 24/7. This is a self-contained building where the people there, they have to be functionally independent. We will have, of course, caretaking staff, so they don't have to do their lawns and things like this, but they are still responsible for all their own housekeeping, their food. So it's an apartment building.
Okay, thank you very much for helping me understand that, because when I saw that, I did not understand that at all. Councillor Crowson already asked my question on, is this going to go ahead whether we approve this or not? And I certainly appreciate your frankness in coming forward to ask for the funds, and that this will go forward whether we approve the funds or not. I certainly appreciate that, and that you have the finances and the connections with banking to be able to move forward with this project. So I certainly appreciate that open honesty with this one. Does anybody else have any other questions? Thank you. All right, seeing none, back to you, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sensing the questions in the room, and the direction of the questions, I'm wondering if I can, as we did yesterday, do a friendly amendment to myself.
If you would like to be friendly with yourself, you're more than welcome to be.
Thank you. Right now, the resolution was to provide the full funding request that was requested by Green Acres Foundation in the amount of an additional 1.5 million. I believe it was Mr. Malcolm who provided some information and an answer that typically we fund around $35,000 per door. And this project, this request does actually meet the conditions of our policy and the program. And so in fairness, I would like to treat all of these projects similarly, and approve the allocation, but to also further amend it to approving, I believe, I'm trying to do my quick math, I'm going to say it's $525,000, which would be $35,000 per door rather than, I believe, the $210,000 that was requested. So I'll make that amendment, changing the 1.5 million to 525,000.
Mr. Matthews has made some math for us, so I believe he's got some comments.
Just one comment through the chair to Councillor Carlson. So one thing on, so that 35,000, I'm looking over Mr. Malcolm here to make sure I've got this right, would it be the total amount less the 300,000 previously? So it'd be about 225,000 to get him to that equal spot.
Thank you. Your math is better than mine. You have a better abacus at your fingertips. So so if we approved 225, that would make it more equitable and fair and honor, I think, the system. So that is the amendment I'll make and put forward.
So approve the allocation of 225,000?
Correct.
So that's what we've got there. And Mr. Matthews, sorry, I can't recall, where are we pulling the funding from on this?
So this funding is from the actual CIP funding. That's at $10 million for future allocations. So the wording inside the resolution is correct. It's the 2023 Capital Improvement Program. Just make sure I got it right here. Yeah, held in reserve. So the wording is correct in the resolution. Just the amount has to be changed.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Carlson?
Thank you. I think I did most of my debate in my discussion on that this does align with policy and practice, but to keep it aligned with precedent, I think the 225 is more in line with that. Okay. So I'd ask for my colleagues' support.
All right. Any other questions on this?
I believe Councillor Middleton Hope has raised his hand.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Yeah, although not a voting member of this committee, I appreciate the discussions, and thank you to Ms. Kozlovi for bringing this information forward. And thank you to Mr. Matthews also for crunching the numbers. And were I in a position to support this initiative, I would. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Middleton Hope. Anybody else? All right. So seeing no one else, we're good to call for the vote. Councillor Carlson, you're okay with we going ahead with that? You don't want to
Call
wrap
for the
up?
vote.
Call for the vote. Question's been called. All in favor? And none opposed. That is approved. All right, and out of our closed meeting, website update, this coming from Councillor Palladino. Be it resolved that the Cultural and Social Standing Policy Committee directs that the report, documents, discussions, and presentations regarding the website update remains confidential in accordance with Section 23, Local Public Body Confidences, and 24, Advice from Officials of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Councillor Palladino.
Call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? And no opposed. That carries. Thank you very much. Our meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, all. Take care.
Ken. Thank you. Thanks for filling in for me.
Thanks, Mark.
Travel.